Well, good morning and welcome to today's children's talk. My name's Dave. Or is it? Should it not be David? You see, there's a problem with the name David. It's not a bad problem, it's quite a fun problem. But when you're called David, what happens is people start to call you different names, different variations in that name. What I thought I'd do is I quickly wrote down a list, typed this up at work the other day, just to show you some of the names that people have called me over the years, hopefully to give you a wee bit of amusement actually. So here's the list. Hope the camera picks this up all right. So we've got number 1, David, quite normal name. 2, Dave, people often shorten to that. Now here's some fun names that people have called me. Dave the Rave, Davy Boy, thank you Martin for that one, Davro, Davros, and the last one, Super Dave. Now, I quite find the last one quite funny, to be honest with you. I was called that a few years ago when I was young. I'm not sure why, to be honest with you, but that's just a fun name. And this got me to thinking when I was actually young about my second favourite story in the Bible. You remember the last talk that I done? I said that the parable of the lost sheep was my favourite story. Well, my second favourite story is the story of David and Goliath. And I automatically assumed, having heard that story at Sunday school for the first time, that I must have been named after David in the Bible. What a brilliant guy to be named after. So I said to my dad after Sunday school, when I was about 8 or 9, I said, Dad, tell me about how you and Mum got to the name David when I was born. And his simple reply was this, much to my disappointment. He said, Jaffa Cakes. Jaffa Cakes. I was like, how did you get to the name David with a box of Jaffa Cakes? And he said, well, David, your mum and I were thinking about a name. We were hanging about with a guy at that time whose name was called David. And we liked the name. And the only thing I can really remember about him, because we've lost touch now, was that he loved Jaffa Cakes. That when you went to his house and you had a cup of tea, he offered you a Jaffa Cake. Or if he came to our house and we offered him a cup of tea, he would say, can I have a biscuit, can I have a Jaffa Cake? So there you go. That's who I was named after. Not the young warrior in the Bible, much to my disappointment. I hope you find that just a wee bit amusing, because I certainly did. After the fact, I was slightly disappointed at the time. So this brings us on to my second favourite story in the Bible, David and Goliath, found in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now, when we're at Sunday school, we're often told the story about this young man volunteering, this kid essentially volunteering to take down a giant with his 5 stones and his sling. But what I want to do is, I don't want to really concentrate on that part of the story. What I want to do is let's hit the rewind button and go to the start of the story for my favourite part. And my favourite part is all about the courage that David showed. Now, what we read from that in that chapter is that David essentially stumbles across this situation where his father, Jesse, sends him down onto the battlefields to send some food to his brothers. If we just remember for a minute the bit of the background, we've got the Philistines on one hill, God's army, the Israelites on the other hill, and this valley in between. And for 40 days, this Philistine giant called Goliath has been taunting God's army, the Israelites, saying, come and send someone to fight me, I'll take you on. And for 40 days, none of the Israelites accepted the challenge. So David comes along to deliver this food and to get a report on his brothers, and he hears all this commotion about Goliath. And he starts to say, who is this guy that's taunting God's army? How dare he do that? And he starts to get a bit riled up. And when Saul hears this, Saul sends for David, and they have a chat about it. And this is my favourite bit of the story. David puts his hand up, essentially, and says, do you know what? I'll do it. I'll fight him. And Saul says, are you crazy? Why would you do this? You're basically a kid. You're a child. You're too young, he says, to do this. But what David does is he shows tremendous courage. He says, I've got this. This isn't a problem to me. And Saul's wondering, what on earth are you talking about? And what David says to him is, look, any time that I've been out tending the flock, there's been bears and there's been lions have captured a lamb. But God's been with me at those times, and I've been able to kill those lions or kill those bears and wrestle that lamb back. All because God's rescued me. And the actual Bible says God has rescued me from the mouth of the lion and the bear. So that's where I want to end the story. The conclusion of the story, as I said, is very well known, and you can take your own time to read it. That's what I wanted to talk about. It was a wee bit about courage this morning. You see, giants don't always come in the form of a 10-foot man who's laden with armour and a spear and a sword and a helmet and shin guards, and even a guy that goes before him with a shield. Giants come in many different forms, and the forms that they come into us in our everyday life is when we face problems or things that makes us scared or anxious. But what I want to tell you today is God's got you. Just like David said, God's got me in this situation. God is with you when you face your giants. Now, I'll quickly tell you a wee story about it's not a wee giant, it's a big giant that I feel as if I'm facing. Is my brother and my sister-in-law are just about to move next month up to Aberdeen, which it's not the other side of the world. It's about 3 hours away. But we've always grown up together and we've done loads of things together, and even just now he's only about 25 minutes along the road on the motorway, and we watch football games together, we go to the Scotland games, we go for walks, we go to see the movies, we do lots of things as a family, and that is probably going to change somewhat in the next month or two. So that's a giant that I've got. But what I feel God's saying to me, and I feel I want to share this with you too, is that it's easy to sit and pray to God for courage when we face a problem. God, make me courageous. But what I think God's actually saying to us is, well, maybe not, David, but what I'm going to do is, I've got you in this situation, and what I'm going to do is give you an opportunity to be courageous. This is an opportunity for you to show that you can be courageous and to rely on me. I've got you in this situation. This is going to work out okay. So that's the wee challenge to me, and I've got to be a lot better. Sometimes I get overly worried or anxious and I get in a bit of a panic about things. But I've got to say, God's got me here. So that's what I just wanted to finish up talking to you about today, is the giants that you might face as a young person, as a child, or as a teenager, or a young adult. As I said before, the giants don't always come in the form of a man. They can come in the form of many things, and here's a couple of wee examples for you. What would happen if you're at school and you're finding a subject really difficult and you're worried about it? How about you do what David done and stick your hand up and say, look, teacher, I'm finding this so difficult to understand. Can you help me? Or what about another giant? What happens after lockdown if you're out with your pals and your pals want to get up to a bit of mischief and cause a little bit of trouble? How about you put your hand up and say, do you know what, guys? This is wrong. This is not the right thing to do. That's a giant, to be able to have the courage to do that. Or what about going one step further? And if they do persist in doing something that's not right, you stick your hand up and you say, do you know what, guys? I've said it's wrong and I'm out of here. I'm going to go up the road. This isn't for me. These are all situations that can cause a bit of worry and a bit of anxiousness. And sometimes it's scary to do the right thing. But David did the right thing. God had his back. And look what happened. And finally, what about maybe the biggest giant of all? What about that decision to make that comes our way when we start to get to know Jesus really well? And sometimes Gavin will say in his message on a Sunday, or you might be at a youth meeting or a kids club, and someone says, Who here would like to accept Jesus into their life, to totally trust him, to give everything over to him, and to lead a life with him and walk on that same path with him? How much courage does it show to understand what that means and stick your hand up and says, do you know what? I'm up for that. I want a piece of that. I want to walk with God for the rest of my life. So that's just a wee lesson on courage. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I'm away now to make myself a cup of tea and have one of those Jaffa cakes. Thanks for listening. Cheers.